Hello, and welcome to English Podcast Zone USA, the podcast that will take your English from okay to good and from good to great. I am Marco, your host for this show. Today's episode is a conversation about return to the sea. Once upon a time in a small town by the sea, they lived an old fisherman with a mustache like a broom. So, a fisherman is someone who catches fish for their job. A mustache is the kind of beard I have. A mustache is a beard over your lip. And a broom is a long tool you use to clean. So a broom has a long handle. And it has sticks that come out at the end. You use a broom to sweep the floor to move dirt and dust on the floor. These days, people often use a hoover or a vacuum cleaner instead of a broom. But in the past, brooms were very common and witches ride on broomsticks. So the mustache of this fisherman is thick and wiry like the end of a broom. Every day, the fisherman sat by the sea with a frown on his face and fished. A frowning girl, so. A frown is when you push your eyebrows together because you are confused or annoyed or sad. His frown was so deep that his eyebrows disappeared into his broom-like mustache, and occasionally he fell asleep. But since you couldn't see his eyes behind all that mustache, the only way you could tell was from his snoring. So, the only way you knew that he was asleep was from his snoring. Snoring is snores, and I can tell you most people snore, or at least most men snore after a certain age. I know because I've shared a bed with many an old man. I mean, it's not a lie, okay? The only way you could tell was from his snoring, which was hard to hear over the sound of the sea. The fisherman lived a slow, simple life, one that called to some ancient past, but he did not live in a slow, simple world. When he started fishing as a young man, other fishermen were like him. They sat on the shore and fished using rods. A fishing rod, so the shore is the side of the sea. Yeah, dry land. A rod is a long stick that you use for fishing. So, fishing rods have a line or a rope on them, and they have a hook at the end. You put bait food on the hook and you throw the line into the water. You cast your rod into the water, but over the years, they traded their rods for nets. So they changed, they stopped using rods, and they started using nets instead, the shore for ships. So, they started working on ships instead of the shore. Contented frowns for crowns of salt. So contented means happy. And a frown is that expression with your eyebrows. So obviously this is a contradiction, right? A contented frown, a happy frown. I'm just being a bit poetic here. Crowns of salt. So a crown is like, a circle on your head. So if you are out fishing on the sea on a ship, you're going to get lots of salt on you, and it maybe forms a crown on your head, all while the fisherman with the broom-like mustache stayed on dry land. Let me read that sentence again. But over the years, they traded their rods for nets, the shore for ships, contented frowns for crowns of salts, all while the fisherman with the broom-like mustache stayed on dry land. The ways of fishing were not the only thing that changed. Tourists came to swim and sunbathe. Rich people rode their yachts out on the water. A very big yacht, YCHD, is a kind of boat. I can't tell you exactly what a yacht is. I just know a yacht is a boat that rich people usually use like a small sailing boat. And loud airplanes flew overhead, and all the while the mustachioed man stayed set in his ways. Mustachioed means having a mustache. When you are set in your ways, you are very specific about how you like things and you don't change. Yeah, you are stubborn. His lifestyle was unprofitable, unsustainable, lazy, yet he never cursed the sea for not giving him enough fish. When you curse something, you say, like for example, maybe I cursed the sky. I am like, oh, you stupid sky. You always rain on me. I curse you. Yeah, it's kind of like insulting. So he never complained to the sea. Enough was what he got, and he always got enough. So, this is again me being a bit poetic. Basically, he always got enough fish, so he had no reason to complain to the sea. When the fisherman was hungry, the butcher had spare meat. The butcher is the person who prepares meat for a job, like a person who sells meat. And when his roof needed mending, when his roof needed fixing, the builder had spare materials, and anyone who saw him wandering home would invite him in for a cup of tea and a chat, despite the fact that he hardly said a word. The townspeople saw him as an anchor. An anchor so. An anchor is this big, heavy metal thing that ships have. When a ship arrives somewhere, they drop the anchor into the water, and the anchor holds the ship in place so that the ship doesn't move around in the wind. The townspeople saw him as an anchor, the one thing that would never change and remind them all how fragile their lives were so fragile. Easy to break, easy to die. The fisherman lived alone and never took a wife or a lover. Over the years, the way people spoke about him changed too. First he was that way, then queer, then gay, until finally as times changed and he grew, older people came to accept that that was just how he was and stopped commenting on it.so. This is referring to how in the past, if a man didn't have girlfriends or wives, people would think he was gay. But in my parents' generation or before that, they wouldn't explicitly say it. They would just say, oh, he's different. He's that way. Right. And then this language has changed over time. One crisp winter's morning. So crisp is when the air is really cold and it like bites you 'cause it's so cold. One crisp winter's morning, the fisherman went out at sunrise to fish. But as he cast his rod into the water, he noticed something bubbling beneath the surface. The bubbling grew and spread like the excretion of an underwater volcano. That was an excretion. That's actually a perfect example of an excretion. An excretion is when you let something out. So you know if an underwater volcano erupts, it will let out all of this bubbles and foam. If I let out an excretion, it may be a burp like I just did. Until finally a huge bedraggled head emerged from the water. A big bedraggled head. Bedraggled is when your hair is like all wet and messy and is kind of sticking together. Emerged from the water, came out of the water, as solid as a mountain. The underwater man had kelp for hair. Kelp is a kind of seaweed. Skin as blue as ice, and a beard that made the fisherman's look like a piece of worn carpet. So, carpet, when you walk over it many times, it wears out. It breaks down, and it doesn't look very good. So, his mustache looked like a worn carpet compared to this underwater man's. But the great face showed signs of stress and decay. Decay is when something is dying, falling apart, breaking. The eyes were ridden with thick, red veins ridden like covered. A bloodshot eye, showing many veins so. Veins are the parts of your body that blood flows through. And when someone is very tired or stressed, they have red blood vessels, I guess technically, but we can say veins in their eyes. The cheeks were covered with barnacles. So, barnacles are a little sea animal. They're not really alive. I don't think they're. They look a bit like rocks, and they stick to the side of rocks on the beach. You can eat barnacles. You have to break them off the rock, and then you can cook them. So, they're kind of like oysters or clams, but a lot smaller and quite ugly. Barnacles on a rock, the cheeks were covered with barnacles, and a great patch of hair was missing from his head. Still, there was no mistaking this for any other than the great god of the sea, Poseidon. So, there was no way you wouldn't know that this was the god of the sea, Poseidon. And if you don't know, Poseidon is an ancient Greek god, the god of the ocean. Old man, boomed Poseidon, for many years you have fished my seas. A statue of Poseidon, the old man wet his lips. So, when your lips are dry, you can put your tongue over them to wet them. The old man wet his lips and cleared his throat. He spoke so rarely now that his voice was no more than a whisper in the morning. Must you speak so loudly? He said, I am not that deaf yet. Deaf, DAF, is when you cannot hear. So, when people get older, they gradually turn deaf. My mom is a bit deaf. She has a hearing aid, a device that helps her hear. Huh, said Poseidon. You see the god before you that you should fear most, and yet you do not even tremble. So, he should be afraid of Poseidon, but he doesn't tremble. He doesn't shake. He's not afraid. Do you accept your death so readily? So readily means easily, without complaining. The fishermen had heard the stories. Of course, no man of the sea lived without hearing them from his father, like a chipped bowl passed down generations. So basically, the stories of the god Poseidon are passed down from father to son in these fishing families like a chipped bowl. So like an old bowl that has chips, parts that have broken off. Those who took from the sea risked the wrath of Poseidon in equal accordance to what they took. Wrath, WRATH, is anger. So, if people who take from the sea, people who fish, risk facing Poseidon's anger in equal accordance in the same amount. So if they take this much fish, they're risking facing this much wrath from Poseidon. Many a fisherman's wife said goodbye to her husband in the morning only to never see him again. So many wives of fishermen say goodbye to their husband. And then my husband goes out and dies because of Poseidon's wrath. I have respected your seas more than any other, said the man. I have not tortured your creatures, and I have only taken what I needed to survive. Torture, T-O-R-T-U-R-E, means to deliberately hurt someone or something. People often use torture to get information out of spies and prisoners. So in this case he's saying, I haven't made sea creatures suffer for no reason. So, you think you are better than those who drag nets along my depths and mine my riches. So, drag nets, to pull nets, and depths are deep places, and the people who mine the riches are maybe drilling oil out of the sea. the old man was careful with his words. He knew from tales, he knew from stories, that Poseidon had a fierce temper, a very strong anger, and his arrogance was unmatched. Arrogance is when you think, oh my God, I'm amazing. I'm the best person. And unmatched means no one is better than you. So, no one is more arrogant than Poseidon. So he has to be careful what he says. They chose a different path. I was born into this world set in my ways. If I am to face my death, so be it. So, if I'm going to die, that's fine. Relax, land dweller, said Poseidon. So, to dwell means to stay in a place. So, a land dweller is someone who lives on land and not in the sea. I will not kill you yet. I have a proposition for you. A proposition is a proposal, like an idea. The great god raised an iceberg hand to his face and scratched. So, an iceberg is like a big mountain of ice that you find in the sea. So an iceberg hand would be a very big hand. The ship, the Titanic, sank because it hit an iceberg. The noise was like a saw on a metal chain. A saw is a long tool. A long piece of metal that you move backwards and forwards to cut something. So, you saw a log, a piece of wood, and if you saw a metal chain, it makes a horrible like noise. A clump of barnacles fell from Poseidon's cheek, so a group of barnacles fell from his cheek, revealing a bloody wound beneath. So, a wound is when you are hurt, an injury. So, under the barnacles, there are these wounds. Ugh, it's a bit gross. Who wrote this? Oh wait, I did. I too grow old. We thought it would be lack of belief that killed us. So we here is referring to the gods, and they thought that they would die because people stopped believing in them. But many things thrive while no one believes in them. Many things thrive. Many things are very successful while no one believes in them. Instead, you humans have become like gods and brought us gods to our knees. So, the humans have brought the gods to their knees. They have humbled them. They have lowered to their position. The fisherman thought back on what he'd seen in his life. He did not claim to be a man of the world, and he had never traveled beyond these shores. But even he could not ignore the changes taking place around him. Rivers that were once clearer than the sky ran thick with oil. Children that once laughed heartily and tripped his steps grew round and rotten-mouthed from imported sweets. So, this part, I kind of heard that in some places in the Amazon, in Brazil, there are these boats that come down and sell food to these local Amazonian tribes. And they're selling this, Western ultra-processed food. So you have these kids who live in these tribes, but they're getting really fat and their teeth are rotting because, they don't have proper dental care. So, these are children that once laughed heartily like, ah, ha, 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 and tripped his steps. So, they would trip him up, they would make him fall over, and now they've grown round and rotten-mouthed from imported sweets, and each day the sea offered fewer fish for him to catch. What is it you need? Said the old man. A wind blew, casting a tangle of kelp over the god's face. So throwing, a piece of kelp, yeah, a piece of his hair over his face, from beneath the shadows, his eyes frothed like storm-born waves. Waves froth as they hit land, so froth is like bubble. It's like the surface of coffee or beer is frothy. So his eyes frothed like storm-born waves, like waves carried on a storm. It is much to ask. So, it's a big thing to ask, the old man smiled. I owe you everything, father of the ocean. The people of the town noticed the fisherman's absence, of course. So they noticed that the fisherman was gone. But none knew his name. They had all called him Old Bushy after his mustache. So, if someone has a very thick beard, we say it's a bushy beard, like a bushed eye in the weeks following Old Bushy's disappearance. The changes in the sea were remarkable. So, they were very noticeable. The trawlers and pleasure cruisers, which once sailed unmolested, met with storm after storm. So, a trawler is a kind of fishing boat that drags nets along the sea floor. Pleasure cruisers are big boats that people go on cruises on, so they're like party boats. And these sailed unmolested. They sailed without being attacked or interfered with, but now they met with storm after storm. Swimmers were ordered to stay away, but a few foolhardy were dragged to their deaths. So foolhardy means you don't care about risks. You're just going to jump into a dangerous situation. And these swimmers were pulled to their deaths. They were dragged to their deaths. What had once been the town's friend now became a brooding enemy. So brooding is like thinking and frowning and being grumpy. So, the sea was a friend before, and now it's become a brooding enemy. But those who lived off the ocean redoubled their efforts. Redouble your efforts means to make even more of an effort after failing. They built stronger ships, devised systems to predict the currents. So devised systems. They created systems to predict, to guess the currents. Currents are the way that the water in the sea moves, fought bitterly against every storm. So, they really fought hard against every storm. Eventually, after several months of drawn-out conflict, so after several months of a long, difficult battle, the sea seemed to give up and return to its previous calm. Every now and then a fisherman would be taken as tribute, so taken as a sacrifice, so to restore the balance. But that had always been the contract. That had always been the deal, the agreement, and these days it was very much in the humans' favor. So now much fewer humans die in the sea than before. Still, something had shifted in the waters, something had moved, changed in the waters. The tides pulled with a bit more vigor. The tide is the edge of the sea. So, you have high tide and low tide. The moon controls the tides, so they pulled with a bit more vigor. They pulled with a bit more energy. The sun did not pierce past the water's surface. The sun did not break through the top of the sea, and the fish became slippery. Slippery means like hard to pick up. Whispers, whispers, passed around town. On a clear night with a full moon, they say, if you sit out by the sea, you might see something beneath the water. At first, you'll mistake it for a bed of seaweed, but look closer, and you might recognize a pair of eyebrows and a mustache pressed together into a frown that he watches and he waits. One day, his day will come, and we will all return to the sea.